Thank you. Are you seeing my screen? Yes, okay. Just give me a feedback if the audio is good, okay. I don't know if you are usually watching videos accelerating velocity. Probably your generation C fast, right? Let me check here. No, because a minha geração não teve essa. Usually for you, 1.5, 2.5. Usually for you, 2? What?
Oh my God, no, 2. No,
Whoa.
for me it's like 1.5 or 1.75.
Deus santo, vocês estão muito velozes, gente. Mas vamos lá. Tenho paciência com o professorzão aqui, vamos lá.
Every country on earth at the moment is reforming public education. There are 2 reasons for it. The first of them is economic.
Are you serious? It's not. Are you watching at this velocity?
Yeah, Deborah is watching too.
But
it depends a lot on the video, but yes.
Okay, but it's your just when it's for obligation, or usually are you watching this?
I guess more for obligation. Yeah.
Okay, for obligation. Okay, just to understand better. Because to relax.
No, to relax.
Let me try.
Normal velocity. Yeah.
I'm gonna try the 1.5. Okay. Because yeah, it's 1.5 now. Sorry. Let me try this one. Okay.
People are trying to work out how do we
Okay.
educate our children to take their place in the economies of the 21st century. How do we do that? Given that we can't anticipate what the economy will look like at the end of next week, as the recent turmoil is demonstrating. How do we do that? The second, though, is cultural. Every country on earth is trying to figure out how do we educate our children so they have a sense of cultural identity and so that we can pass on the cultural genes of our communities while being part of the process of globalization. How do you square that circle?
Excuse me. Is it too fast or not? What about for you?
For me, it's
Mateus,
good.
it's okay? Yeah? Ok. Digam-me se tiver qualquer coisa, eu paro, tá?
The problem is they're trying to meet the future by doing what they did in the past. And on the way, they're alienating millions of kids who don't see any purpose in going to school. When we went to school, we were kept there with a story, which is if you worked hard and did well and got a college degree, you would have a job. Our kids don't believe that. And they're right not to, by the way. You're better having a degree than not, but it's not a guarantee anymore. And particularly not if the route to it marginalizes most of the things that you think are important about yourself. Some people say we have to raise standards if this is a breakthrough. You know, like, really, yes, we should. Why would you lower them? You know, I haven't come across an argument that persuades me of lowering them. But raising them, of course we should raise them. The problem is that the current system of education was designed and conceived and structured for a different age. It was conceived in the intellectual culture of the Enlightenment and in the economic circumstances of the Industrial Revolution. Before the middle of the 19th century, there were no systems of public education. Not really. I mean, you could get educated by Jesuits, you know, if you had the money. But public education, paid for from taxation, compulsory to everybody and free at the point of delivery, that was a revolutionary idea. And many people objected to it. They said it's not possible for many street kids, working class children to benefit from public education. They're incapable of learning to read and write, and why are we spending time on this? So there's also built into it a whole series of assumptions about social structure and capacity. It was driven by an economic imperative of the time, but running right through it was an intellectual model of the mind, which was essentially the Enlightenment view of intelligence. That real intelligence consists in the capacity for a certain type of deductive reasoning and a knowledge of the classics originally. What we come to think of as academic ability. And this is deep in the gene pool of public education, that there are really 2 types of people, academic and non-academic, smart people and non-smart people. And the consequence of that is that many brilliant people think they're not, because they're being judged against this particular view of the mind. So we have twin pillars, economic and intellectual. And my view is that this model has caused chaos in many people's lives. It's been great for some. There have been people who have benefited wonderfully from it. But most people have not. Instead, they suffer this. This is the modern epidemic, and it's as misplaced, and it's as fictitious. This is the plague of ADHD. Now, this is a map of the incidence of ADHD in America, or prescriptions for ADHD. don't mistake me here. I don't mean to say there is no such thing as attention deficit disorder. I'm not qualified to say if there is such a thing. I know that a great majority of psychologists and pediatricians think there is such a thing, but it's still a matter of debate. What I do know for a fact is it's not an epidemic. These kids are being medicated as routinely as we had our tonsils taken out. And on the same whimsical basis.
Se alguém não pegou, tá, gente? Esse era o número do déficit de atenção nos Estados Unidos.
And for the same reason, medical fashion. Our children are living in the most intensely stimulating period in the history of the earth. They're being besieged with information and calls for their attention from every platform, computers, from iPhones, from advertising holdings, from hundreds of television channels. And we're penalizing them now for getting distracted. From what? You know, boring stuff at school, for the most part. It seems to me not a coincidence totally that the incidence of ADHD has risen in parallel with the growth of standardized testing. Now, these kids are being given Ritalin and Adderall and all manner of things, often quite dangerous drugs, to get them focused and calm them down. But according to this, attention deficit disorder increases as you travel east across the country. People start losing interest in Oklahoma. They can hardly think straight in Arkansas. And by the time they get to Washington, they've lost it completely. And there are separate reasons for that, I believe. It's a fictitious
Vocês viram que é o George Bush ali no cartoon, né?
epidemic. If you think of it, the arts, and I don't say this exclusively of the arts, I think it's also true of science and of maths, but I say about the art particularly because they are the victims of this mentality currently, particularly. The arts especially address the idea of aesthetic experience. An aesthetic experience is one in which your senses are operating at their peak, when you're present in the current moment, when you're resonating with the excitement of this thing that you're experiencing, when you are fully alive. An anesthetic is when you shut your senses off and deaden yourself to what's happening. And a lot of these drugs are that. We're getting our children through education by anesthetizing them. And I think we should be doing the exact opposite. We shouldn't be putting them asleep. We should be waking them up to what they have inside of themselves. But the model we have is this. I believe we have a system of education that is modeled on the interests of industrialism and in the image of it. I'll give you a couple of examples. Schools are still pretty much organized on factory lines, ringing bells, separate facilities, specialized into separate subjects. We still educate children by batches. You know, we put them through the system by age group. Why do we do that? You know, why is there this assumption that the most important thing kids have in common is how old they are? You know, it's like the most important thing about them is their date of manufacture. What do you mean? Well, I know kids who are much better than other kids at the same age in different disciplines, you know, or at different times of the day, or better in smaller groups than in large groups, or sometimes they want to be on their own. If you're interested in the model of learning, you don't start from this production line mentality. It's essentially about conformity, and increasingly it's about that as you look at the growth of standardized testing and standardized curricula. And it's about standardization. I believe we've got to go in the exact opposite direction. That's what I mean about changing the paradigm. There was a great study done recently of divergent thinking. Published a couple of years ago. Divergent thinking isn't the same thing as creativity. I define creativity as the process of having original ideas that have value. Divergent thinking isn't a...
Just one question. Do you remember our two diamonds design thinking process? The convergent, the divergent? In some way we can consider this question also here.
But it's an essential capacity for creativity. It's the ability to see lots of possible answers to a question, lots of possible ways of interpreting a question, to think what Edward de Bono would probably call laterally, to think not just in linear or convergent ways, to see multiple answers, not one. So, I mean, there are tests for this. I mean, one kind of common example would be people might be asked to say, how many uses can you think of for a paperclip? Well, those routine questions. Most people might come up with 10 or 15. People who are good at this might come up with 200. And they do that by saying, well, could the paperclip be 200 foot tall and be made out of foam rubber? You know, like, does it have to be a paperclip as we know it, Jim? You know. Now, they tested this, and they gave them to 1,500 people. It's in a book called Breakpoint and Beyond.
Excuse me. Did you ever listen about this test using clips? It's the most famous about creativity. The author is called something Howard. He's a very special and famous author. When he suggests to use and to how many possibilities you can imagine using some clips or some strange objects, you know, you can measure the level of your creativity.
And on the protocol of the test, if you scored above a certain level, you'd be considered to be a genius at divergent thinking. Okay. So my question to you is, what percentage of the people tested, of the 1,500, scored at genius level for divergent thinking? Now you need to know one more thing about them. These were kindergarten children. So what do you think? What percentage at genius level? 80. 80, okay. 98%. Now, the thing about this was it was a longitudinal study. So they retested the same children 5 years later, age of 8 to 10. What do you think? 15? They retested them again 5 years later, ages 13 to 15. You can see a trend here, can't you? Now, this tells an interesting story, because you could have imagined it going the other way, couldn't you? You start off not being very good, but you get better as you get older. But this shows two things. One is we all have this capacity, and two, it mostly deteriorates. Now, a lot of things have happened to these kids as they've grown up, a lot. But one of the most important things that happened to them, I'm convinced, is that by now they've become educated. You know, they've spent 10 years at school being told there's one answer, it's at the back. And don't look. And don't copy, because that's cheating. I mean, outside schools, that's called collaboration, you know, but inside schools. Now, this isn't because teachers want it this way, it's just because it happens that way. It's because it's in the gene pool of education. We have to think differently about human capacity. We have to get over this old conception of academic, non-academic, abstract, theoretical, vocational, and see it for what it is, a myth. Secondly, we have to recognize that most great learning happens in groups, that collaboration is the stuff of growth. If we atomize people and separate them and judge them separately, we form a kind of disjunction between them and their natural learning environment. And thirdly, it's crucially about the culture of our institutions, the habits of the institution and the habitats that they occupy.
Amazing, right? Good. Great. I love this video because, first of all, we are creating kind of critical sense about our behavior, you know, and now you have to return to it for your professor speaking in half velocity. 1.5 and for me is low. Great. What do you think about these questions? Do you agree? Do you have some inquietation? Do you feel these questions in your generation? Do you feel these questions inside the design market, or what do you feel about these questions?
I feel like these questions can be applied to in our like design generation, because it's questions that because it's questions that I don't think it has a time, like, you know, how can I say that? A time.
A limited
Like,
time.
Yeah. I think you can always bring this type of questions back depending on the situation.
And do you agree with this disruption between the academic, or here in South America, the academic knowledge and the persons who don't have access, and we create this kind of empty space between both parts? Do you feel that?
Yeah, I feel like it always will be a difference, cultural too, I think. But yeah, education will always be something to influence. Influence it.
Yeah,
I don't have my brain together today, teacher. I'm sorry.
No, you're great. It's okay.
No, but I always think that it's gonna have this difference. I don't think like one can do better than the other just because you have different like types of studies and I don't know, the way you work things, but it's gonna be a difference of the way you do, you know? I don't know if you
Yes, we got it. Great, it's good. And you know, these questions that for me, in my opinion, it's good for you to understand, is the possibility to use a visual thinking to popularize, to spread some superior knowledge, you know, or what is considered some kind of superior, you know, or better. So usually I think in the beginning of this year, Harvard began a course about drawing your project, how to visualize scientific data for the persons, you know. Because why that? For example, the D Lab, the social design department inside the Harvard, inside they're doing trade, they're doing how can I say? They're doing courses around the world, called IDDS, International Development Design Summits. They believe that innovation is happening trying to rescue traditional knowledge. And what is traditional knowledge? It's the knowledge with usually the simple persons around us, right? So, o pipoqueiro, a pessoa que sabe plantar uma mandioca, se não me engano, mandioca em inglês é cassava. So, these persons are keeping the traditional knowledge, and they are trying to continue this knowledge for the new generation, because the new generation they don't want to learn again or study this traditional knowledge. So this D-Lab Department of Design, they are considering innovation rescue the traditional knowledge. It's strange, but it's necessary, you know. And maybe you can understand this question for your next 10 or 12 years, you know. You need to use the visual thinking to spread the knowledge, you know, even in design, because sometimes you're going to work with persons older than you, for sure, and you need to share process, you know, to co-create in some way. And I really believe that visual thinking can collaborate with this to decrease this difference, you know. Great. Deborah, would like to tell us something. Do you feel about that, or the video? Do you agree?
I think it was a really good representation of how schools work, how everything is standardized, although people are different and work in different ways, and I think different stuff.
Great. Do you feel that in your education, the mistakes and the errors, they were stimulated in some way or not?
No.
No.
They were bad.
Great. Usually, I think we are prepared to don't make mistakes, right? And when we begin design, we have to change our minds and understand the error as our friend, you know,
yes.
to help us work. Great. Thanks, Deborah. Gabriel, Igor, João, Mateus would like to say something. João is writing here. I totally agree, and I feel that skill didn't help with creativity and exploring. Whereas most of the time they limit where your mind can go. Perfect, João. Perfect. Now it's good also for you to understand how design can contribute with the education model, you know, with the educational process as in the market, especially. Actually, this area is increasing, it's growing a lot. So now you can see design as an innovation more than, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago inside education. So,
teacher, can I
yes.
say something?
Yes.
Like, I'm having leitura e escrita acadêmica now. It's really not cool, but our group decided to do visual thinking as our team, and we had to like read a lot of articles about it. And like most of the articles we found was visual thinking applied in schools and how it's different, and all the articles, like we saw the difference between a school that was like a traditional, like you said, knowledge and stuff like that, and a visual thinking at school. And it was like super cool to see that design can implementar the student life and make it not just more useful, but like not tão monótono, you know, like the students want to learn more because they see more things in creative ways, and I think that's super nice.
Amazing, not so boring. Could say great, amazing, and nice that who suggested to use visual thinking?
Me.
Yes, great, is very good. Very good. You know, actually, the a União Europeia is beginning a nomenclature. I don't know if you can say this one, but it's RRI, Research and Responsible Innovation. Is a term that began maybe 2-3 years ago. And these RRI, they are trying to use not just visual thinking, but how to, como aproximar a ciência da população. Então, a União Europeia está investindo forte nisso. E o Visual Thinking é uma ferramenta, é uma interface muito forte para fazer isso. E o que você está fazendo é perfeito. Porque so maybe as designers, we are doing this interface. We are suggesting in our schools, in our institutionals, in our advertising agencies, whatever. So nice, you did it. Awesome. Complimenti. Auguri, tanti auguri. Mateus Gabriel would like to say something just to practice English. Would you feel something? Do you agree with that or not? It's okay. Great. Okay. Not anything to add today. No problem, Gabriel. Great. You as a musician, Gabriel, maybe you have this open mind always, right? I think that musicians are always prepared for disruptive thinking, in my vision. I like a lot musicians. Great. So I'd like to suggest you something now, guys. Please let's practice in some way. You're going to create my interface, okay? So take a pen or a pencil, and I'm going to ask you some questions. And I would like that you could practice creating the image about what we are saying. It's kind of our meeting, and you're going to create some, we can say, I don't like to suggest to create icons, but if you prefer, okay. The idea is that we are doing a meeting now, and you're going to create the result of our meeting to be shared later with some students in the future or not. So my first question is, we are now after 2 months studying our subject. If you had to write 10 adjectives or 10 values or 10 points or 10 questions that you believe that you can consider visual thinking in your life, how could you write these 10 points? You know, like for visual thinking, I said that we have 4 main steps. You know, the 4 steps of visual thinking. We can consider 4 as the main. But if I had to ask you, I am asking you to write 10 aspects, 10 main aspects to consider the visual thinking in your life after these 2 months. What kind of points can you suggest? Can you write? Okay. For sure, if you think that, in my opinion, it doesn't change nothing, or I don't feel that changed a lot, or I feel that maybe changing in some way. If you had to point someone, okay, let's try to create 10, okay? I have my 10, but before to tell you these 10 points, because these 10 points I reached after reading at least 8 books. My first 8 books about visual thinking to prepare the ideas and the subjects for you. So I have these 10 points in my mind, but I would like to listen to you now, you know. So could you answer me, if you prefer to tell in the chat or if you need some time, 10 main aspects. No, let's do something. I'm gonna give you 5 minutes to think, okay? I'm gonna turn off my camera and even my mic. So take 5 minutes for you to think and I return. It's okay? Okay, it's 2h43. I'm gonna return 14:48. It's okay? 5 minutes for you. Go ahead. Sorry guys, I have to return here to record for the students that probably will see this class in the future, and I forgot to record the task. Okay, so Isa, if you want to take your time, go ahead. I'm going just to repeat the text here, okay? So dear student, if you're watching our class later, especially maybe Marina, the book, a hug for you. Now we're going to practice to change the text in image, and the text that you should draw now, I suggested 10 main topics. The first one is reducing overwhelm, or reduzir a sobrecarga when using visual thinking, right? The second one is decision making, so problem solving, learning, communicating, clarify your speaking, helping to create focus, prioritizing, brainstorming, and reflection, and engage teams. Okay, I'm going to repeat just to be sure. Reducing overwhelm, decision making, problem solving, learning, communicating, clarify your speaking, helping to create focus, prioritizing, brainstorming, reflection, and engage teams. Okay, I'm going to also write this text for you in the Blackboard in our WhatsApp group for you to be sure. Okay, but also here to leave our register. Okay, so now we're gonna give 30 minutes for the student to practice and we're gonna return. See you later. Hugs.